This is an EX card. It has silver borders and a Cosmos foil pattern, and some even have an e-reader strip at the bottom. But this is an EX too, and so is this. This is a GX, and this is a Level.X. We also have Prime, Break, V, and a lot more to talk about. Don't worry, I'm going to make this as simple as possible. The simplicity of Pokemon cards is long gone though. If you grew up with base set, its design not only reflects the early days of Pokemon, but also the early days of our childhood, when things were simple. The first real game mechanic to make a splash was the Shining cards, specifically Shining Magikarp and Shining Gyarados. It looks subtle, but Shining Gyarados actually shook things up a bit due to it being a basic Pokemon. Did you even notice it doesn't evolve from Magikarp? Furthermore, all 10 of the Shining Pokemon released during the Neo series are basic Pokemon. These cards are also pretty strong, so we're limited to only one copy per deck. The Shining cards paved the way for the first EX cards, released with Ruby and Sapphire EX in 2003. Oh, it's worth noting here that the logos and branding all use an uppercase EX, but the cards use the lowercase EX. That's important later. So these were the first big changes in Pokemon cards. Players were no longer limited to just one per deck. However, they did have to evolve their Pokemon since these were no longer basic. And this is the first time we'd see the addition of a rule box. On these cards, it states that your opponent takes 2 prize cards when they knock out your EX. The earlier EX cards had the e-reader strip at the bottom, which allowed you to swipe them into your Game Boy Advance. However, they did away with that pretty quickly, so most don't have it. Okay, so here's the pattern. Each series of the Pokemon TCG is going to have a special game mechanic. For the EX series, it's EX cards, but later we're going to see GX, V, and others. But they also introduce a sort of secondary class of powerful cards that usually modify the Pokemon to be basic. These don't shift the meta entirely, but they add spice. For the EX series, that secondary class was the Gold Star cards. Now, even though these are really just strong cards, they did go on to become some of the most sought after cards, period. I made a whole video on them, but for this video, all you need to know is that these are very much like the Shining cards 2.0. You're limited to 1 per deck, and they are basic Pokemon. The only downside to the Gold Stars is that they are extremely expensive. Lately, I've been trying to find a clean copy of the Gold Star Latias on Whatnot, who's sponsoring today's video by funding this amazing giveaway. I stayed up all night trying to snipe the best deals to really stretch out the budget so one of you could win all of this. Okay, I may have gone over budget a little bit. All you have to do to enter the giveaway is subscribe and leave a comment with your Whatnot username, and I'll pick someone at random. It's free to sign up, and if you scan this QR code or use the link below the like button, you'll instantly get a $15 credit to your account. This time I decided to give away sealed product so someone could have a chance at landing a huge hit. Details are in the description below, and again, all you have to do is leave your Whatnot username and you'll be entered into the giveaway. So when the EX series came to an end and Diamond and Pearl started, the EX cards were phased out and replaced with the new game mechanic Level.X cards. I don't know how everyone else feels about this era of Pokemon cards, but I felt that the levels they added was kind of silly. However, the Level.X mechanism is cool. How this works is that a Level.X card is a 3rd stage evolution. Once your Pokemon is fully evolved, you can level up to further power up that card. But the Level.X card can still use the previous stage's attacks and abilities. There aren't a lot of Level.X cards, so you can actually catch them all if you like them. The secondary class of powerful cards for this series were these cards with an added suffix. They have a bunch of different letters behind Pokemon's names, which can be confusing, but each letter, or pair of letters I guess, actually represents the team or trainer's name. G stands for Galactic, GL stands for Gym Leaders, this symbol represents the Elite Four, C stands for Champions, and FB stands for Frontier Brain. The Diamond and Pearl era of the TCG was a low point in popularity for the franchise, resulting in what feels like an awkward teenage phase, something that would bleed heavily into the next mechanic, Prime cards. The Heart Gold and Soul Silver series introduced Prime cards, and the special game mechanic that came with them is that they have no special game mechanic. Okay, it sounds weird, but they're just stronger. Kind of. But that didn't hold them back. Many of the Prime cards were unstoppable in-game, the most famous probably being Donphan, which possessed a Pokebody ability plus 2 attacks. But the Prime cards really delivered in the design department. The Pokemon name was printed in gold foil, and the illustration window had spikes surrounding it, and a hollow foil border. And then the Pokédex information was actually removed, leaving behind a clean look, and more room for an extra attack, of course. And the artwork for Prime cards features only close-ups of the Pokemon's face. Now we did also get Legend cards during this series of the TCG. Some people use the word gimmick to describe some Pokemon designs, and I think that's appropriate here. While these are some of the coolest cards to date, they are gimmicky from a gameplay standpoint. You see, they didn't offer much. They have strong attacks, but you have to play both halves together. But these cards do have a rule box, which, much like the EX cards, allows your opponent to draw 2 prize cards upon defeat. So, as we start to mature out of that awkward phase, the Pokemon Company turned back to its favorite 2 letters, EX. But this time, uppercase. The return of EX Pokemon was good, I believe. I wasn't playing the TCG at this time when Black and White came out, but I was collecting, and EX cards were cool. However, there isn't a lot to say about them. They brought back some familiar design elements, like the Pokemon's illustration extending beyond the artwork, and the rule box with the 2 prize cards thing, but otherwise they were just your typical strong Pokemon that you would build a deck around or consider a chase card. But they are basic Pokemon this time, so you don't have to evolve them. Black and White came to an end, but as the XY series was introduced, the Pokemon EX weren't cut. They actually ran right through the EX series. Now, these cards were actually laying the foundation for a bigger, better mechanic, M Pokemon EX. This was tied a little more closely with the games. Basically, some Pokemon got an additional evolution. Venusaur, Charizard, and Blastoise, among others, could evolve into their Mega Evolution, Super Saiyan forms, I guess. The way they did this in the TCG was by having an evolution box. So the Mega Evolution Pokemon would have to evolve from the EX Pokemon, making an M Pokemon EX. The catch here is that your turn ends when having done so. And this is when the card design really kind of went wild without being awkward for the first time. These cards had texture and giant characters flying across the foreground too. English cards had Japanese characters, and Japanese cards had English characters. But we did get break cards. Okay, break cards are not loved. They weren't received well among consumers, I'm trying to say. Their gameplay involved an additional evolution, not unlike the LV.X cards, and that's pretty much it. From a collector's standpoint, they look different, but not necessarily good. Now, I realize that everyone has opinions, and break cards just didn't stand a chance when M Pokemon EX were looking so good. They didn't make very many of them, and they kind of just got lost and phased out pretty quickly. But EX cards were here to stay. This was the first time we saw a new game mechanic be cross-generational, expanding more than one series, and EX cards would actually continue until today. Nope, just kidding. They dropped it and gave us GX, the cooler EX. Yeah, so the Sun and Moon series introduced GX cards, which are very similar to EX cards, the lowercase EX cards, because they weren't basic and they had to evolve. The big twist here is that the GX cards have a GX attack, which may only be used once per game. If you've ever seen one of these little acrylic or metal GX markers, they're to indicate that your GX attack has been used. This is also when they went to war on our wallets and introduced multiple card variants, including full arts and rainbow cards, and then later shiny vault versions too. But before we move on, there were also GX tag team cards. Now these are not just GX cards with 2 Pokemon, because there were some balance changes here. These are basic, again, to avoid evolving one Pokemon into 2 Pokemon or having to evolve 2 Pokemon at once. They just ignored all that and they made them basic. But since there were 2 Pokemon per card, these were strong cards. And to balance that, their rule box stated that a knockout was now worth 3 prize cards to your opponent. They also brought in a bunch of alternate art cards. So these were the same card functionally, but with a different and often more desirable illustration. We also got Prism cards during this series, which are kind of like the Gold Stars or Break cards. They didn't make a huge splash, but they were limited to 1 per name per deck. So 1 Celebi and 1 Darkrai were okay, but 2 Darkrai was illegal. And they had a prism behind their name, similar to the Gold Star cards, having their symbol. Also had this big foil prism on the bottom half of the card. I've always liked these cards, and I felt like they flew under the radar, to be honest. Prisms didn't last long though, and much like Level.X and Prime and GX, they have yet to make a return. Sword and Shield gave everyone back their V cards. So these have familiar elements that we've already gone over. All V Pokemon are basic and worth 2 prize cards upon a knockout. They are pretty much a rebranding of the EX cards, uppercase EX. But V-Max was later brought in, which evolved from V. So this is like the Pokemon EX to M Pokemon EX thing. But a V-Max knockout is worth 3 prize cards like the GX tag team cards. But things weren't confusing enough, so they were forced to give us V-Star cards. Now, these branch off from V cards and are an alternate path from V-Max. V-Star cards are worth 2 prize cards upon knockout, but this time they have a V-Star power, which may only be used once per game, like the GX. Now, if you remember the little V-Star markers, that's what they're for. Another weird one is V-Union. So these cards are divided into 4 separate pieces and can only be combined and played once every piece is in the discard pile. And they're worth 3 prize cards upon knockout. Now, they didn't make very many of these, and all of them had a jumbo version made too, which is kind of neat. But we're not done with the Sword and Shield era. Radiant cards are kind of like the new Shining cards. They make Stage 1 and Stage 2 Pokemon basic, but are limited to just 1 card per deck. And of course, they are very strong. They also have a unique and, in my opinion, unmatched holo foil pattern. And I quickly want to mention the Celebrations Classic subset. So this is a small set of 25 cards released in 2021 to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Pokemon. Why is this relevant? Well, the set is composed of reprints that either shifted the meta of the TCG or were just remarkable cards loved by everyone. Which means we have a little bit of each mechanic, like Shining Magikarp, Mew EX, Umbreon Goldstar, Luxray Level.X, Donphan, as I mentioned earlier, M Rayquaza EX, Tapu Lele GX, and a few more. Alright, Sword and Shield was overwhelming to say the least. I'm sorry I couldn't cover it in further detail, but we have to move on to the current series. Scarlet and Violet, the present series of the TCG, brought back EX cards once again. That's lowercase EX this time. So you should be familiar with the new EX cards. Not basic this time, they need to evolve, and they're worth 2 prize cards. These are very similar to the lowercase EX cards from the early 2000s. But a few sets in, we also got the Terra cards. Okay, so the Terra cards sometimes switch the Pokemon's type, but also add a rule box at the top of the card that just reminds you Terra Pokemon can't be damaged if they're on the bench. Recently, Mega Evolution cards were announced. Now, at the time of making this video, we don't have a lot of details, but we do know that this is a return of the Mega mechanic. First, you'll notice that Mega is actually spelled out fully, indicating that it's not quite the same as the previous M mechanic. These guys are considered Stage 1 or 2, evolving straight from their previous evolution. There were 3 prize cards this time, and the evolution does not end the turn. Listen, if this was overwhelming, I'm sorry. It's not my fault, I swear, but that's just how trading card games are sometimes, especially Pokemon. If you like this, if you want to learn more, if you want to figure out what all these crazy rarity symbols mean, try this video.